The taste of copper was the first thing to return. It sat heavy on my tongue, thick and metallic, a stark contrast to the sterile, ozone-scented air of the Solis Prime embassy. I remember the screaming, high-pitched melodic shrieks that only the ethel could produce, and the frantic thrum of luminous shards vibrating in the walls. But mostly I remember the heat, not the warmth of a sun, but a searing, white-hot localized sun blooming in the center of my chest. I tried to breathe, but my lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. Above me, the vaulted ceiling of the great hall shifted and blurred. The sage indigo-skinned faces of the ethel nobles swam in my vision, their bioluminescent markings flashing a frantic, terrified crimson. Then she was there, Princess Xylia. Her face was inches from mine, her skin glowing with a soft, ethereal violet that seemed to pulse in time with the agony in my ribs. Her hands, slender and cool, pressed against the ragged hole in my uniform. I could see the dagger discarded on the white marble floor, a jagged splinter of obsidian tainted with a mixture of red and glowing cyan. My blood. Her blood. Vora-Nexus, she whispered. The word didn't come through my ears. It echoed inside my skull, vibrating against my teeth. It wasn't a voice. It was a frequency. Lieutenant Vance, look at me, she urged, and for the first time in my 32 years of life, I felt someone else's terror as if it were my own. It wasn't empathy. It was a physical invasion. I could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. I could feel the cold sweat on her palms. Easy, Highness, I tried to say, but all that came out was a wet, rattling cough. Don't let them move you. I remember the shadow of Archprelate Valerius looming over us, his facial markings twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated loathing. He was shouting something about sacrilege, about the pollution of the sacred line, but his voice was drowned out by the hum. The hum was everything. It started as a low vibration in the floor and rose until the entire world was nothing but a single, sustained note. The glowing blood on the floor began to crawl, the red and the cyan weaving together into intricate fractal patterns that defied every law of physics I knew. It looked like a circuit board made of liquid starlight. Then the connection snapped shut. It was like being hit by a freight train of pure information. Every secret I had buried, every dark corridor of the Obsidian Protocol, every face of the people I had left behind. They were all ripped out of me and laid bare. And in return, I was flooded with the history of 1,000 years. I saw the birth of the floating cities, the long silence of the deep space voyages, and the crushing loneliness of a princess who had never known the touch of a peer. The pain vanished, replaced by a terrifying absolute clarity. I saw the world through 4 eyes. I felt the marble floor through 2 sets of knees. The ancestors have spoken, a voice cried out from the crowd, sounding more like a death sentence than a blessing. The hum grew deafening, and then, mercifully, the world turned to white. Consciousness returned in slow, agonizing ripples. I was back in the broken parts of my own mind, the parts where I usually spent my nights replaying the disaster at Helios. But the silence was gone. In its place was a soft, rhythmic pulsing, like a distant drum heard through a thick wall. Thump, 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 thump. It wasn't my heart. Mine was slower, heavier. This one was light, a rapid-fire staccato that felt indigo. If a sound could have a color, that heart was the deepest shade of the ethel night. I opened my eyes and immediately squinted against the soft, diffused light of the recovery ward. This wasn't the human infirmary at the embassy. The walls were organic, grown from a substance that looked like translucent pearl, and the bed beneath me didn't feel like a bed. It felt like a warm, supportive hand. Back with us, Lieutenant. I turned my head. Ambassador Miller was standing by the far wall, looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days. His suit was wrinkled, and the cynical twist of his mouth was more pronounced than usual. He was holding a tablet, his thumb scrolling through what I assumed were 1,000 angry missives from Earth Coalition High Command. Where is she? My voice was a ghost of itself, cracked and dry. Ambassador Miller sighed and pulled a chair over, the legs scraping softly against the living floor. The princess is in her private sanctuary. Her father, the emperor, has her under 24-hour guard by the royal sentinels. Not that it matters. According to the ethel doctors, she might as well be in the room with you. I frowned, trying to sit up. A sharp sting in my chest reminded me of the obsidian blade. I looked down. The bandages were strange, woven from a shimmering fiber that seemed to be knitting into my skin. What happened? I asked. The ceremony. The assassin. The assassin is KIA, Miller said flatly. The Sentinels didn't leave enough of him to interrogate. But that's the least of our problems, Kai. You went and did something much worse than dying. You triggered a Vora-Nexus. I remembered the term. The embassy briefing had mentioned it as a myth, a superstitious relic of the Ethel's tribal past. A bio-quantum entanglement. It's just a tradition, I muttered, though I knew I was lying. I could still feel that indigo heart beating in the back of my mind. Miller let out a short, harsh laugh. A tradition? Kai, look at your arm. I pushed back the sleeve of the medical gown. Beneath the skin of my forearm, a faint, glowing vein of violet light pulsed. It wasn't a bruise. It was a bioluminescent circuit, identical to the ones I had seen on Xylia. It flickered as my anxiety spiked. The Ethel don't think it's a tradition, Miller continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. They think it's the will of their gods. They believe your blood and hers are now one. Their legal system, their religion, their entire social structure is built on the sanctity of this bond. And you, a human with a record that smells like a dumpster fire, just bonded yourself to the future Empress of Ethelgard. I closed my eyes. The weight of it was staggering. I was a disgraced soldier, a man who had been sent to this rock as a convenient way to disappear. I was supposed to be a ghost, an advisor who did nothing but check the locks on the doors. Does Command know? Command is having a collective aneurysm, Miller said, standing up to pace the small room. Earth wants you back. They want to put you in a lab in Sector 7 and see how a human body can maintain a quantum link with an alien. But the Emperor, he's refused to let you leave the palace. He says that if you move more than 10 kilometers away from Xylia, the separation anxiety could kill both of you. Is that true? The ethel texts say the bond demands proximity during the stabilization phase. If the link is severed before it's set, the neural backlash is supposedly fatal. Fubar, Vance. This situation is completely fubar. A sudden wave of sorrow washed over me. It wasn't mine. It was a deep, aching sadness, the kind that comes from realizing you've lost something you never knew you had. I gasped, clutching my chest. Kai. Miller moved closer, his hand hovering over my shoulder. She's crying, I whispered. The ambassador looked around the empty room, then back at me, his expression softening for a split second before the mask of the career diplomat returned. Get used to it, Lieutenant. From what the doctors tell me, you're never going to be alone again. He left a few minutes later, leaving me with a tray of synthetic nutrients and the crushing silence of the ward. But the silence wasn't empty. I lay back and closed my eyes, trying to find the edge of my own mind. It was harder than I thought. There were memories there that weren't mine. The smell of rain on a desert I'd never visited. The feel of a crown that I'd never worn. And then a thought, clear as a bell, rang through the indigo haze. I am sorry, Kaylin. I froze. The voice was hers. It wasn't a sound. It was an impression, a shape in the dark. I did not choose this for you, she continued, her mental voice sounding tired and small. To be tied to a stranger, to be hated by my people, it is a heavy burden for a defender. I took a shaky breath, trying to project my thoughts back. I was just doing my job, Princess. I didn't think about the blood. That is why the Nexus chose you. I felt a flicker of warmth, a brief moment of genuine curiosity from her side. You acted without thought for yourself. In our world, that is the definition of a soul worth binding. My soul isn't worth much, I thought bitterly. The ghosts of the Helios disaster rising up to meet me. I've got a lot of static in my head, Xylia. You're not going to like what you find in here. We are all made of static and stars, Kaylin, she replied. And I felt a strange, cooling sensation on my brow, as if her hand were actually there. Rest now. The archprelate is calling for a council of purists. They will try to find a way to break us. Let them try, I thought, my old military grit flaring up. I've survived worse than a bunch of angry priests. Have you? Her question was gentle, but it cut deep. Because the bond does not just share our strength, it shares our shame. I have seen the fire at the Obsidian Protocol, Kalen. I have felt the weight of those 300 souls you think you lost. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just lay there in the dark, a human soldier tied to an alien princess by a thread of glowing blood, realizing that the hardest part of this mission wasn't going to be the assassins. It was going to be the fact that for the first time in years, I had nowhere left to hide from myself. The transition from the clinical isolation of the recovery ward to the princess's private sanctuary was not a journey made on foot. They moved me in a suspended biopod, a translucent vessel that hummed with a low frequency designed to stabilize my erratic pulse. Every time the pod drifted more than a few meters from the indigo heart beating in my mind, a cold, hollow ache blossomed in my marrow. It was as if a physical tether was being stretched to its breaking point, threatening to snap and leave me drifting in a void. The Ethel called it the pull. To me, it felt like being a kite in a hurricane, held only by a fraying string of starlight. As the biopod drifted through the crystalline corridors of the palace, I watched the world of Solis Prime blur past the pearlescent walls. The architecture here was grown, not built. Towering pillars of living mineral reached toward the sky, pulsating with the rhythmic light of a city that breathed. There were no harsh angles, no cold steel. Everything was fluid, organic, and terrifyingly alien. I felt like a smudge of grease on a silk tapestry, a grunt in a temple. We reached the royal sanctuary, a sprawling wing of the palace that seemed to hang suspended over the violet clouds of Ethelgard Prime. The air here was thicker, saturated with the scent of crushed jasmine and something sharper, like ozone before a lightning strike. The pod hissed open, and the sentinels, tall, silent warriors with armor that looked like obsidian glass, stepped back to allow me to stand. My boots felt heavy and clumsy against the floor. "You look like you've gone 10 rounds with a heavy lifter, Vance." I turned my head to see Ambassador Miller standing near a grove of singing ferns. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood a woman I didn't recognize, though her uniform marked her as an Earth Coalition xenobiologist. She was staring at the glowing veins in my arm with an expression that bordered on hunger. "Ambassador," I croaked, my throat still feeling like I'd swallowed a handful of dry sand. "Where is the princess?" "She is waiting for you in the inner resonance chamber," Miller said, gesturing toward a set of massive doors that looked like they were carved from a single, giant pearl. "The Emperor has agreed to this proximity test. If you two can stabilize without burning out each other's neural pathways, the Coalition gets to keep its diplomatic standing. If not, well, I've already drafted the casualty report for the brass." "Charming as always," I muttered. "And who's the spectator?" "Dr. Eris Thorne," Miller replied, nodding toward the biologist. "She's here to make sure you don't spontaneously combust or turn into a science project before we can get some data out of you." I ignored Thorne's scrutinizing gaze and walked toward the doors. As I approached, the pull grew stronger, but the pain changed. It was no longer a hollow ache. It was a resonance. It was as if my own heart was trying to synchronize with a beat that was faster, more melodic. The doors parted without a sound, and I stepped into a room filled with nothing but light. Xylia was sitting in the center of a shallow pool of luminescent water. Her indigo skin was nearly translucent in the glare, and the violet markings on her forehead were glowing with a fierce, steady intensity. She didn't look up when I entered, but the water around her began to ripple in a perfect geometric pattern. "Sit, Kalen," her voice echoed in my head, bypassing my ears entirely. "The water is tempered to your biology. It will help ground the static." I hesitated, my military instincts screaming at me to keep my boots on, to keep my guard up. But the pull was now an irresistible tide. I stepped into the pool, the warm, viscous liquid swirling around my ankles. I sat opposite her, our knees inches apart. The moment I settled into the water, the world vanished. It started with a flicker of fire. The deep sink wasn't a choice. It was a dam breaking. I tried to claw my way back, to keep the doors of my mind shut, but the Vora-Nexus didn't care about my privacy. It wanted the truth. Suddenly, I wasn't in Solis Prime anymore. I was back at Outpost Helios 5 years ago. The sky was a bruised purple, choked with the smoke of burning fuel and the acrid stench of ionized air. I could feel the weight of my pulse rifle in my hands, the heat of the barrel burning through my gloves. Around me, the survivors were huddled in the ruins of the medbay. 140 civilians, most of them children, their eyes wide with a terror that I knew I couldn't cure. "Lieutenant," the voice of my sergeant crackled in my earpiece, distorted by the jamming field of the insurgent dropships. "The extraction window is closing. Command says we bug out now. The Obsidian Protocol is in effect. We leave the heavy cargo behind. The heavy cargo. That's what they called the people who couldn't run fast enough. The ones who didn't fit on the last shuttle." I looked at a girl, no older than 6, clutching a tattered rag doll. She looked at me as if I were a god, as if my uniform alone could hold back the dark. "Negative, Sergeant," I heard myself say, my voice sounding like it belonged to a man who had already died. "We stay. We hold the line until everyone is out. Vance, if you stay, you're MIA. You're throwing away your career for a bunch of ghosts. The shuttle is lifting in 2 minutes." I didn't answer. I turned back to the barricade and started firing. I remembered the heat of the explosions, the way the air screamed as the insurgents leveled the outpost. I remembered the feeling of being left behind, the silence that followed when the last human shuttle disappeared into the clouds. We held them off for 3 hours, 3 hours of blood and fire. By the time the secondary rescue team arrived, there were only 12 of us left alive. I had saved 30 souls, but I had lost 110. And I had broken the prime directive of the Earth Coalition. I had chosen the lives of ghosts over the orders of the brass. The memory shifted, turning inside out. Now I was seeing it through her eyes, but it wasn't a military report. It wasn't a failure. Through Xylia's perspective, the memory of Helios was a symphony of gold and silver. She didn't see the blood. She saw the light of a man's spirit refusing to go out. She felt the crushing weight of my guilt, yes, but she also felt the purity of the choice. "Kaylin," her voice was a soft caress against the jagged edges of my soul. "Why do you carry this as a burden? You were a shield." "I'm a failure," I thought, the words heavy with 5 years of self-loathing. I broke the code. I stayed when I should have run. I let my unit die for a handful of civvies who probably didn't even remember my name a week later. "You stayed because you could not do otherwise," she replied. Her indigo hands reached out through the luminescent water and touched mine. The moment our skin met, the memory of Helios dissolved into a shower of white sparks. "You think you are broken because you did not follow the machine's logic. But the Ethel do not value the machine. We value the resonance. You are the most resonant soul I have ever encountered." I pulled my hands away, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I don't want your pity, Princess, and I don't want your philosophy. I'm a soldier. I'm meant to be a tool, not a symphony." She looked at me then, her violet eyes reflecting the entire history of her world. "You are no longer just a soldier, Kaylin Vance. You are the Vora-Nexus. You are the bridge. And whether you like it or not, your broken pieces are exactly what this world needs to see." I stood up, the water cascading off my uniform like liquid glass. The pull had stabilized into a low, comfortable hum, but the internal chaos was louder than ever. I turned to walk away, but her voice caught me at the door. "Kaylin?" "What?" "The girl with the doll. She is a teacher now, in the new Geneva colony. She named her firstborn Vance." The breath left my lungs in a sharp, painful rush. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I walked out of the chamber and into the waiting eyes of the ambassador and the biologist, feeling as if I had been stripped naked and scrubbed with fire. "The stabilization is at 98%, Thorne whispered, staring at her tablet with awe. "It's impossible. A human and an Ethel? They shouldn't be this compatible." Miller looked at me, his eyes searching for the man I used to be. "You okay, Kai? You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked at the glowing violet vein in my arm, the light pulsing in perfect time with the heart in the other room. "I've seen enough ghosts for one lifetime, Miller," I said, my voice cold and sharp as a bayonet. "Now let's get to the sit-rep. If the purists are coming for us, I want to be ready to greet them." The transition was over. The bond was set. And for the first time since I left the service, I realized that I wasn't just fighting for my rank or my reputation. I was fighting for the only thing that had ever made me feel like a man instead of a weapon. I was fighting for the resonance of a world that didn't deserve to be broken. The inner sanctuary of Solis Prime was a paradox of peace and looming violence. While the floating gardens of the palace whispered with the songs of wind harps and bioluminescent flora, the political atmosphere was thick with the scent of an impending storm. 2 days had passed since the Vora-Nexus had stabilized, and in that time, I had become the most hated man on the planet and the most valuable asset in the Coalition's ledger. I was sitting on a bench made of woven light vines, watching the violet clouds of Vanguard drift beneath the floating city. My chest was still tight, the wound from the obsidian blade now a silver scar that throbbed whenever Xylia felt a spike of stress. And today, her stress was off the charts. "Vance, check fire on the brooding, would you?" I turned to see Sergeant Jax, one of the few human security personnel the Ethel allowed in the Royal Wing. Jax was a mountain of a man, a veteran of the Belt Wars with a face that looked like it had been carved out of a lunar asteroid. He dropped a heavy gear bag on the ground and sat beside me, his tactical suit hissing as the environmental seals adjusted. "Brass is in a tizzy, Vance," Jax said, popping a piece of synthetic gum into his mouth. "Miller's been in the Emperor's council room for 6 hours. Word on the street is that Archprelate Valerius is calling for your head. Literally, he wants to see if the bond holds once the human half is decapitated." "They can try," I said, my hand instinctively ghosting toward the pulse pistol at my hip. The Ethel guards had stripped me of my weapons, but old habits were hard to kill. Jax let out a low whistle. "You've got it bad, don't you?" "The pull. I've seen the way you look at the princess's tower. You're like a lost pup." "It's not an emotion, Jax. It's biology. It's like being hungry or thirsty. If I'm too far away, my nervous system starts to fry." "Tell that to the civvies back at the embassy," Jax grunted. "They think you've gone native. They think you're being ghosted by her mind, like some kind of brain slave. Is it true? Is she in there right now?" I looked inward. Xylia was there, a soft, indigo presence at the back of my consciousness. She was currently reviewing a trade manifest with the Guild of Shapers, her mind a whirlwind of numbers and diplomatic nuances. "She's busy," I said, "but she hears you." Jax jumped, looking around as if he expected a purple princess to pop out of the bushes. "Damn, Vance. That is spooky. You're like a walking walkie-talkie." Before I could respond, the indigo presence in my mind flared with a sudden, sharp spike of fear. It wasn't the dull anxiety of a trade meeting. It was the cold, jagged terror of a predator in the room. "Kaelin!" her voice screamed in my skull. "The High Council! Something is wrong." I was on my feet before Jax could blink. My heart was racing, my vision narrowing into the tunnel vision of a combat zone. "Jax, gear up!" I shouted, already sprinting toward the Great Hall. "Something's happening in the council chamber. Vance, wait!" "You don't have authorization," Jax yelled, but he was already grabbing his pulse rifle and following me. We tore through the gardens, my boots skidding on the pearlescent walkways. Every meter I moved closer to the chamber, the resonance in my chest grew stronger, more frantic. I didn't need a map. The Vora-Nexus was a compass, and the needle was spinning wildly toward Xylia. We reached the massive pearl-carved doors of the council chamber. 2 royal sentinels barred the way, their obsidian spears crossed. "Stand aside," I snapped, my voice cracking with an authority I shouldn't have had. "The human is forbidden," the sentinel on the left intoned, his voice a series of melodic clicks. "This is a matter of the pure blood." I didn't have time for a diplomatic debate. I stepped into the sentinel's guard, my hand moving in a blur I didn't recognize. It was an ethel strike, a precise 2-finger thrust to the neural junction at the base of the neck. The sentinel collapsed as if his strings had been cut. Jax took the other one, slamming his rifle butt into the guard's solar plexus with a grunt of satisfaction. "Nice moves, Vance," Jax panted. "Since when did you learn to fight like a squid?" "I don't know," I whispered, staring at my fingers. I knew where the weak point was." We kicked the doors open. The council chamber was a cathedral of light and shadow. Emperor Valerius sat on the high throne, looking old and weary. Below him, the 12 high counselors were gathered in a circle, their skin glowing a pale, sickly green, the ethel color for judgment. In the center of the circle, Xylia was standing, her indigo robes torn at the shoulder. And standing over her, holding a shimmering shard of lumina crystal, was Archprelate Valerius. "This is a violation of the resonance law," Valerius was shouting, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "The girl is tainted. The human has infected the bloodline with his chaos. We must excise the rot." Miller was there too, being held back by two ethel guards, his face red with fury. "This is an act of war, Valerius. If you touch her, the coalition will level this city." I didn't wait for the threats to land. I moved into the circle, Jax right behind me with his rifle leveled at the Archprelate's chest. "Let her go," I said. The room went silent. The High Counselors stared at me with expressions of pure disgust. Valerius turned, his violet eyes burning with a fanatic's light. "The beast returns to the scene of his crime," he sneered, gesturing with the Lumina shard. "Do you see, Emperor? The bond is so strong that he cannot even allow her to face judgment alone. He is the leash, and she is the hound." "Kaelin, get out of here!" Xylia cried out. But through the bond, I could feel her relief. It was like a warm tide washing over my fear. "I'm not leaving, Highness," I said, my eyes locked on Valerius. "Archprelate, you talk a lot about purity and bloodlines. But I've seen your mind. I've felt the Vora-Nexus reach out to everyone in this room. You're not worried about tradition. You're worried about power. How dare you?" Valerius began, but I cut him off. "You sent the assassin, didn't you?" I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The bond was a two-way street. As Valerius spoke, the Vora-Nexus picked up the jagged, dissonant frequencies of his guilt. He was the one who wanted her dead. He wanted a martyr he could control, not a living reformer who would bring humans into the fold. "Lies!" Valerius screamed. He raised the Lumina shard, the crystal beginning to glow with a blinding white energy. It was a shard of severance, a weapon designed to disrupt neural frequencies. If he used it on her, it would rip the bond apart and likely fry both our brains in the process. "Jax, take the shot," I yelled. "Negative, Vance. The guards are in the way." I didn't have a rifle. I didn't have armor. All I had was the bond. I looked at Xylia. For a split second, our minds synchronized perfectly. I wasn't just Kaelin Vance, the disgraced soldier. I wasn't just a man in a foreign palace. We were a single, unified frequency. "Give me your strength," she thought. "Take it all," I replied. I reached out, my hand glowing with a violet light that matched hers. A wave of kinetic energy, fueled by the Vora-Nexus, exploded outward from both of us. It wasn't magic. It was the raw power of two biological systems resonating at a frequency that the physical world couldn't contain. The High Counselors were thrown back. The Archprelate was slammed against the base of the throne, the shard of severance shattering on the marble floor into a million useless pieces. Silence returned to the chamber, broken only by the heavy breathing of the guards and the soft chime of the wind harps outside. Emperor Valerius leaned forward, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and awe. "The unification," he whispered. "The ancient texts said it was possible, but with a human?" Xylia stood up, her robes fluttering in the dying energy of the blast. She looked at her father, then at the fallen Archprelate. "The bond does not choose based on blood, Father," she said, her voice echoing with the resonance of two souls. "It chooses based on the truth of the heart. Kaelin Vance saved my life because he is a protector, and I have chosen to keep him because he is the only one in this city who sees me for who I am, not what I represent." The Emperor looked at me. I stood tall, my chest out, my gaze steady. I felt like a soldier again, but the orders weren't coming from a radio or a brass-heavy office in Geneva. They were coming from the indigo heart beating in my chest. Ambassador Miller stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I think, Emperor, that we should move the trade discussions to a more secure location, and perhaps we should discuss the immediate retirement of the Archprelate." The Emperor nodded slowly. "Take Valerius to the Tower of Silence. He will await a full inquiry. And as for the human," he paused, looking at the glowing violet vein in my arm, "he shall remain at my daughter's side. Not as an advisor, not as a ghost, but as the sentinel of the Nexus. Jax lowered his rifle and gave me a crooked grin. Sentinel, huh? Sounds like a promotion to me, Vance. Does it come with a pay raise? I didn't answer. I walked over to Xylia and took her hand. The resonance between us was a steady, golden hum. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, stubborn hope. We walked out of the council chamber together, through the lines of stunned ethel nobles and silent sentinels. As we reached the floating gardens, Xylia stopped and looked at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. You saved me again, Kaelin. We saved each other, I said. And Xylia? Yes? That teacher in New Geneva? The one who named her kid after me. Xylia smiled, her skin glowing a warm, soft violet. She's real, Kaelin. I can show you the memory again if you want. No, I said, looking out over the clouds of Ethelgard. I believe you. I realized then that for the first time in 5 years, the ghosts weren't screaming. They were quiet. They were listening to the symphony. The shadows in Solis Prime were still long, and the war for the future was far from over. But as I stood there with Xylia, the pull felt less like a leash and more like an anchor. I was a man who had lost his way in the fire of war, only to find a new world in the blood of an alien princess. I was still a soldier, still a man with 1,000 flaws, but I wasn't alone. And in the silence of the Vora-Nexus, I finally understood that being broken didn't mean you were useless. It just meant the light could get in. We had crossed the first threshold, survived the first trial by fire. But as the suns of Ethelgard began to set, casting long crimson shadows across the pearl-white city, I knew that Valerius was just the beginning. The Earth Coalition wanted a weapon. The Ethel wanted a god. And Xylia and I, we just wanted to be free. The resonance hummed. The city breathed. And deep in the heart of Solis Prime, the Vora-Nexus began to sing a new song, one that would either save us all or burn the stars to ash. The descent into the sunken glass gardens was a plunge into the prehistoric marrow of Ethelgard Prime. To get there, we had to leave the gleaming, pearl-skinned towers of Solis Prime and board a gravity-tethered lift that dropped 2,000 meters beneath the floating city's foundations. The air changed as we fell, growing heavy with the scent of damp loam, ancient ozone, and the metallic tang of deep-crust minerals. Beside me, Xylia was a pillar of quiet indigo light. She had shed her royal ceremonial robes for a simpler suit of matte black kinetic weave, though her presence still commanded the small space of the lift. I could feel her anxiety humming like a live wire at the back of my skull. It wasn't the sharp terror of the council chamber, but a slow, grinding dread. She was taking a disgraced human soldier to meet the Shapers, the oldest and most reclusive caste of her people. To the Ethel, the Shapers were the keepers of the genetic song. To me, they sounded like a bunch of high-strung scientists with too much tenure. You're thinking about the mission parameters again, Kaelin, she whispered. Her voice in my head was smoother now, less of a shock and more of a constant, underlying rhythm. Hard not to, I thought back, leaning my shoulder against the vibrating wall of the lift. My hand hovered near the empty holster at my hip. The Ethel had given me back my pulse pistol after the archprelate's stunt, but the safety was hard-coded to Xylia's biometric signature. If I pulled the trigger without her mental okay, the gun would just be an expensive paperweight. I'm a boot on the ground in a world made of glass, Highness. I'm just waiting for the sound of something breaking. It won't be you, she projected, a faint wave of warmth touching my mind. You are more durable than you realize. The lift slowed with a gentle magnetic hiss. The doors dissolved, revealing a cavern so vast it had its own weather patterns. Huge bioluminescent fungi clung to the ceiling, casting a pale cyan glow over a landscape of crystalline flora. Trees made of spun glass reached hundreds of meters into the air, their leaves tinkling like wind chimes in the subterranean breeze. This was the Sunken Glass Gardens, the biological archive of an entire civilization. Stay frosty, Vance, a voice crackled in my earcom. I winced. Sergeant Jax was stationed at the top of the lift shaft, providing overwatch with a long-range thermal scanner. I'm on it, Jax, I replied, my voice low. Just keep your eyes on the sensors. If any of those purist squids follow us down here, I want to know before they start shooting. Roger that. The ambassador is still playing nice with the Emperor, but the scuttlebutt says the Earth Coalition is moving a carrier into the sector. 3 light years away and closing. Things are getting a bit crowded in the neighborhood. Copy, out. We stepped onto a path of crushed obsidian that wound through the glass forest. The pull was intense here, the Vora-Nexus reacting to the concentrated biological energy of the gardens. My skin felt tight, the violet veins in my arm pulsing with a rhythmic light that matched the heartbeat of the forest. Xylia led me toward a structure that looked less like a building and more like a giant, petrified heart. This was the Shaper's sanctum. As we approached, a figure emerged from the shadows of the glass trees. He was old, even by Ethel standards. His skin was the color of a bruised plum, and his bioluminescent markings had faded to a dull, flickering gray. He didn't wear robes. He wore a mantle of living moss that seemed to be part of his very skin. Elder Rin, Xylia said, bowing her head in a gesture of profound respect. The old man didn't bow. He didn't even acknowledge Xylia at first. His milky white eyes were fixed on me. He walked a slow, tottering circle around me, sniffing the air as if I were a piece of meat that had sat in the sun too long. Asymmetrical, Rin croaked. His voice wasn't melodic like Xylia's. It sounded like grinding stones, a jagged frequency, a discordant note in a symphony of perfection. He's a soldier, Elder, Xylia said, her voice tight with defensive energy. He saved my life. The Vora-Nexus chose him. The Vora-Nexus does not choose, the Elder countered, stopping directly in front of me. He was shorter than me, but his presence felt like a mountain. It responds to resonance. And this creature is full of static. He is broken in 42 different places, Princess. His neural pathways are scarred by fire and guilt. He is a walking disaster. I felt a surge of familiar anger. Look, Grandpa, I don't need a medical report from a guy wearing a rug, I said, my human bluntness cutting through the ethereal atmosphere. I'm here because your princess is tied to me. If you can't help us stabilize the link, then get out of the way. Xylia's mental gasp was like a physical slap. Kalen, be silent. But Elder Rin didn't look offended. A dry, rattling sound came from his chest. A laugh. He speaks with the honesty of a dying star, Rin said, turning to Xylia. That is why the bond held, child. You are too perfect. You are a mirror reflecting a mirror. You needed someone who was broken to give the light a place to catch. Symmetry is beautiful, but asymmetry is life. He gestured for us to follow him into the sanctum. Inside, the air was humming with the sound of 1,000 lumina shards. They were arranged in complex, rotating lattices, projecting holographic strands of DNA that danced in the air. You seek to stabilize the unification, Rin said, standing before a massive pool of silver liquid. But you do not understand what you are asking for. The 5th phase, completion, is not a partnership. It is a dissolution of the self. You will no longer be Kalen Vance and Princess Xylia. You will be a single entity across 2 bodies. Is that what happened to my mother? Xylia asked softly. Rin nodded. Queen Sorella and her protector reached completion during the Great Siege. It gave them the power to save our world, but they lost the ability to exist apart. When he fell in battle, she didn't just mourn him. She vanished. Her mind simply ceased to be because the other half of the frequency was gone. The humanistic theme I had been avoiding for years suddenly hit me with the force of a kinetic strike. I had spent my whole life trying to be a self-contained unit, a one-man army, a weapon that didn't need anyone else. The idea of losing my I to become a we was more terrifying than any insurgent ambush. I'm not sure I'm built for that, I said, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. I've spent 35 years trying to keep my head on straight. Now you're telling me I have to let someone else drive? Xylia looked at me, her violet eyes searching mine. You think it's a loss of control, Kalen, but it's a gain of perspective. You've spent your life in the dark, thinking your flaws were weights. What if they're the only things keeping you anchored? Elder Rin stepped toward the silver pool. If you wish to proceed, you must face the reflection, not the one in the mirror, but the one in the nexus. You must show the bond your greatest shame, and you must accept it. If you hide from it, the static will eventually tear your brains apart. He reached out and touched the violet vein in my arm. The light flared, blindingly bright. Show her, Kalen. Show her the moment you decided you weren't worth saving. The world dissolved. I was back at Outpost Helios, but the colors were wrong. The fire was blue and the screams of the civilians were a high, discordant whistle. I saw the sergeant, his face a blur of military-issue shadows. Vance, get on the bird. That's an order. I looked at the girl with the doll. In the real memory, I had stayed. But in this version, the reflection, I saw the other path. I saw myself stepping onto the shuttle. I saw the hatch closing. I saw the expression on the girl's face as the engines roared and we lifted into the sky. I saw the outpost being consumed by a nuclear bloom. 140 lives turned into ash because I had followed the protocol. I watched that version of myself, the perfect soldier who followed orders, and I felt a self-loathing so deep it threatened to drown me. Is this what you want? I screamed into the void of the memory. You want me to be the guy who follows orders? You want me to be a tool? No, Xylia's voice whispered, her indigo form appearing beside me in the blue fire. I want the man who stayed. I want the man who was brave enough to be a failure in the eyes of his masters. The blue fire shifted, turning back to the orange-red of the real world. The memory of the girl Vance surfaced, the teacher, the mother, the life I had saved by being broken. I realized then that my guilt wasn't a flaw I had to erase. It was the foundation of my humanity. It was the proof that I cared more about a single life than 1,000 pages of military code. The vision snapped back to the sanctum. I was on my knees, gasping for air, my chest heaving. Xylia was beside me, her skin glowing with a warmth that felt like a sunrise. The static is clearing, Elder Rin observed, his voice sounding a little less like grinding stones. You have accepted the asymmetry, but the moment of peace was shattered by a sharp, high-pitched chirping from my earcom. Vance, Jack's here. We've got a problem. The sensor grid just went 0-day. I've got 3 unfriendlies in the lift shaft, and they aren't Ethel. They're Coalition Spec Ops. I surged to my feet, the pulse pistol already in my hand. My mind snapped into combat mode, but this time it was different. I didn't feel the cold, mechanical detachment of the soldier. I felt a fierce, protective resonance. Ambassador Miller, I growled into the comms, explain why Earth soldiers are rappelling down into a restricted Ethel sanctuary. Vance, listen to me. Miller's voice came through, sounding strained and distant. The situation has changed. The Coalition has authorized a Priority 1 retrieval. They think you're being held against your will. They're sending in a team to get you out. Get me out? I looked at Xylia, whose face was a mask of shock. You mean they're coming to kill the princess and kidnap me for a lab? It's for the greater good, Vance, Miller shouted. We can't let the Ethel control a human officer with a bioweapon. The greater good, the oldest lie in the galaxy. Jax, they're not friends, I barked. Engage and hold the lift. I turned to Xylia and Elder Rin. We need to move. The sunken gardens are about to become a kill box. Elder Rin looked at me, a strange glint in his milky eyes. Asymmetry, he whispered. Show them the power of a broken man, Sentinel. The journey to the Elders' Council had been meant to find a way to peace. Instead, it had led us directly into the heart of a betrayal that went deeper than blood. The Earth Coalition, my own people, were no longer the rescuers. They were the invaders, and I was the only thing standing between them and the woman I was now biologically destined to protect. The lesson was beginning to take shape. I wasn't fighting for Earth anymore. I wasn't even fighting for Ethelgard. I was fighting for the truth of the bond, the idea that 2 beings, as different as starlight and stone, could find a resonance that was worth more than any empire. And as the first Coalition flashbang detonated at the edge of the glass forest, I realized that I didn't care if I was a weapon or a symphony. I was a man who had finally found a reason to stay. The first Coalition strike team didn't come in with a whimper. They came in with a series of sonic blasts that shattered the glass trees in a 100-meter radius. The sound was like 1,000,000 crystal chandeliers hitting the floor at once, a deafening, high-frequency scream that made my indigo heart pulse with a jagged, white-hot agony. Xylia collapsed, her hands clamped over her ears, her skin flickering a sickly, translucent gray. The Vora-Nexus was amplifying the sonic trauma, piping the ethel's sensory overload directly into my human brain. It felt like someone was driving a heated needle into my prefrontal cortex. "Jax, report!" I yelled over the comms, scrambling to drag Xylia behind the base of a petrified fungus tree. "I'm pinned, Vance." Jax's voice was barely audible over the roar of pulse fire. "They've got a portable scrambler on the lift. I'm 0 dark 30 on visuals. They're using the new ghost suits. I can't see them, but I can sure as hell feel them. Ghost suits. High-end coalition stealth tech that bent light and masked heat signatures. These weren't just standard grunts. This was a Black Ops unit, probably the same guys I trained with 3 years ago. "Kalen," Xylia gasped, her eyes unfocused. "The forest. It's crying." "Stay with me, Highness," I growled, checking the charge on my pulse pistol. It was sitting at 95%. Not enough for a prolonged firefight, but enough to make a mess. "I need you to focus. Block out the noise. Give me a tactical feed on the ghost suits. Your skin can sense the atmospheric displacement, can it?" She nodded weakly, her violet markings beginning to pulse with a low rhythmic throb. "Yes, I can feel the ripples in the resonance. There are 4 of them, approaching from the eastern glass ridge." I looked toward the ridge. To my human eyes, there was nothing but the pale cyan glow of the fungi and the shimmering ruins of the glass trees. But through the bond I felt it, a subtle pressure in the air, a minute shift in the frequency of the forest. "One at 10 o'clock, 40 meters, I whispered. "Another at 2 o'clock, flanking. They're using a standard diamond pattern." "Jax, I've got beads on them," I shouted into the comms. "I'm going loud." "Vance, don't be a hero," Jax barked. "Just bug out with the girl. There's an old drainage conduit behind the sanctum." "No time," I said. I stepped out from behind the fungus tree. I didn't aim with my eyes. I aimed with the pull. I felt the displacement of the first ghost suit as a cold spot in the Vora-Nexus. I pulled the trigger. The pulse round, colored a brilliant violet by Xylia's biometric authorization, hissed through the air and impacted something invisible. A blue-white spark of electricity rippled across the ghost suit's stealth field, shorting it out in a shower of sparks. A human soldier in matte gray armor materialized, stumbling backward with a hole in his chest plate. He hit the ground and didn't move. One care IA. The other 3 suits immediately opened fire. Bright orange bolts of plasma chewed into the petrified tree I was using for cover, sending shards of stone and glass flying like shrapnel. I felt a stinging pain in my shoulder as a splinter sliced through my uniform. "Kalen!" Xylia's scream in my head was a mixture of concern and a sudden, sharp clarity. "I'm fine," I thought back, the adrenaline washing away the pain. "Keep the feed open." "Where's the 3rd one?" "He's high, on the glass branch above you." I rolled to the left just as a heavy caliber round cratered the ground where I'd been standing a second ago. I looked up and saw the shimmer of the 3rd ghost suit perched 50 meters up in the canopy. Before I could aim, Xylia surged to her feet. She didn't have a gun. She had the forest. She raised her hands, her indigo skin glowing with an intensity that lit up the entire cavern. The glass trees responded, their branches vibrating with a high, melodic note that shattered the coalition's sonic blasts. The branch beneath the sniper suddenly crystallized and snapped, sending the invisible soldier tumbling through the air. He hit the obsidian floor with a sickening crunch. 2 down, but the remaining 2 ghost suits were closing in, their plasma fire suppressing us. They were professionals. They weren't going to let a bit of alien mysticism slow them down. "Vance, it's Miller!" The ambassador's voice broke into the channel again, sounding desperate. "Stop this. You're killing your own brothers. That team has families. They're just following orders. They're following orders to murder a peaceful diplomat in cold blood." "Miller!" I roared, diving behind a fallen crystal log. "Is that the Earth Coalition's new standard? Because if it is, I'm glad I'm out of the club." "It's about the future of the species," Miller shouted. "We can't let the Ethel have a monopoly on bioquantum tech. If we can't study the bond, we have to neutralize it." The humanistic theme I had been grappling with suddenly crystallized. Loyalty. I had spent 15 years being loyal to a flag, to a chain of command, to a set of protocols. I had thought that loyalty was what made me a man. But as I looked at Xylia, who was shivering with the effort of holding back the forest agony, I realized that I had been loyal to a machine that viewed people as data points and bonds as threats. True loyalty wasn't about a flag. It was about the person standing next to you in the fire. I looked at the last two ghost suits. They were 10 meters away, moving with the cold, calculated efficiency of the Earth's finest. I could hear their heavy breathing through the static of the comms. "Vance, stand down," one of them said. His voice was familiar. It was Captain Reed, a man I'd served with in the Belt Wars. We shared a bunk for 6 months. We'd saved each other's lives on 3 different moons. "Don't make us do this, Kai. Just step aside. Let us take the girl and we can go home. We'll tell them you were compromised. You can get your rank back. You can be a hero again." I looked at Xylia. She was watching me, her violet eyes wide, her mind a silent, open book. She wasn't begging. She wasn't commanding. She was just waiting to see who I really was. "A hero?" I said, my voice sounding hollow in the vast cavern. "Reed, the last time I was a hero, I ended up in a gutter with a hole in my soul. I'm done with that." I stood up, holstering my pistol. I stepped in front of Xylia, spreading my arms. "You want her? You have to go through the Nexus, and the Nexus is me." Reed's ghost suit flickered as he deactivated the stealth field. He stood there, his rifle leveled at my head, his face a mask of military discipline. But I could see his hands shaking. Just a little. "I have an order, Kai. I have a resonance, Reed." For 5 long seconds, the only sound was the dripping of silver liquid in the Shaper's pool and the distant rattle of Jax's firefight at the lift. The world felt like it was balanced on the edge of a razor. Reed's finger tightened on the trigger, but he didn't fire. He lowered the rifle, his head dropping. "Damn it, Vance. You always were a stubborn grit." "Reed?" The other ghost suit crackled, the soldier sounding confused. "What are you doing?" "I'm declaring this mission FUBAR," Reed said, his voice cracking. "Vance is right. This isn't a retrieval, it's an execution. I didn't sign up to be a hitman for a bunch of suits who are scared of a purple light. Reed, you're in violation of—" The other soldier didn't finish. A violet bolt of energy, fired from the sanctum, struck him in the back. He collapsed into a heap of short-circuiting stealth tech. I turned around. Elder Rin was standing at the entrance of the petrified heart, his mossy mantle glowing with a fierce ancient power. He was holding a small silver sphere that pulsed with the same light as the Vora-Nexus. "The cycle is broken," Rin said, his milky eyes fixed on Reed. "One of the invaders has seen the light. Perhaps there is hope for your kind after all." I looked at Reed, who was staring at his fallen comrade with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He had just thrown away his career, his future, and his safety. He had done exactly what I had done at Helios. He had chosen a person over a protocol. "You're going to be a ghost now, Reed," I said, walking over to him. "Yeah," Reed muttered, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Guess I'll have plenty of company." "What now, Sentinel?" "Now we get out of here," I said. But as we turned to move toward the conduit, the entire cavern began to shake. A deep tectonic groan echoed through the glass trees. I looked up and my heart stopped. The floating city of Solis Prime, 2,000 meters above us, was beginning to vent plasma. Huge plumes of blue fire were erupting from its underside, illuminating the clouds like a dying star. "Miller! What's happening?" I screamed into the comms. "The carrier—" Miller's voice was barely a whisper, choked with static. "They've initiated the Scorched Earth Protocol. They're dropping the city, Vance. They're going to bury the gardens and everything in them. They'd rather destroy Ethelgard than let it be free." The betrayal was complete. The Earth Coalition wasn't just coming for Xylia and me. They were coming for the world. I looked at Xylia. She was staring up at the falling city, her skin glowing a brilliant, defiant violet. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a queen who had finally found her throne. "They think they can bury the resonance, Kalen," she said, her voice echoing in my head with the power of 1,000 ancestors. "But the resonance is the Earth itself." She reached out and took my hand. Elder Rin and Captain Reed stood behind us, a small, asymmetrical band of survivors in a world that was literally falling apart. "Show them, Kalen," she thought. "Show them what happens when the light gets in." I squeezed her hand, the Vora-Nexus surging to a frequency I had never felt before. The fifth phase, completion, wasn't a dissolution, it was a magnification. Hold on tight, I thought back, as the first foundations of Solis Prime began to crumble. This is going to be one hell of a ride. The turning point had been reached. My loyalty was no longer a question, it was a shield. And as the darkness of the deep crust closed in around us, I realized that I didn't care if I was broken. Because together, we were the only thing in the galaxy that was whole. The world was screaming, but it wasn't a sound humans were meant to hear. It was a tectonic shriek, the sound of 1 billion tons of pearl stone and gravity-defying machinery losing its battle with physics. Above us, the foundations of Solis Prime were shedding massive chunks of structural debris. Slabs of floating rock the size of city blocks that plummeted through the violet clouds, smashing into the sunken glass gardens with the force of kinetic bombardment. Each impact sent a shockwave through the Vora-Nexus that nearly put me on my knees. It wasn't just physical vibration, it was the psychic death rattle of the forest. I felt every glass tree that shattered. I felt the agonizing pulse of the bioluminescent fungi as they were snuffed out by the darkness of the falling city. "Vance, move your carcass!" Captain Reed's voice was a harsh bark, cutting through the indigo static in my brain. He grabbed the webbing of my tactical vest and hauled me forward just as a piece of an ethel spire pulverized the obsidian path where I'd been standing a second ago. "Stay frosty, Reed," I grunted, blinking away the violet spots in my vision. My chest felt like it was being squeezed by a hydraulic press. "I'm Oscar Mike. The pull is getting heavy." The pull wasn't just a direction anymore. It was a gravity of its own. As Solis Prime fell, the distance between the princess and the city's heart was closing, but the psychic weight was magnifying. Xylia was staggering beside Elder Rin, her skin so pale it was almost white, her markings flashing a desperate staccato amber. "We have to reach the veins," Elder Rin croaked, his mossy mantle charred by plasma fire, but his spirit seemingly untouched by the chaos. "If the city hits the crust directly, the resonance will shatter the planet's mantle. Ethelgard will become a graveyard of cold stone." "The veins?" Reed asked, his pulse rifle scanning the shifting shadows. "You mean the geothermal conduits?" The Shaper didn't answer with words. He pointed toward a massive fissure in the cavern wall, where glowing blue liquid, the planet's lifeblood, was geysering out in rhythmic spurts. "Jax, you still with us?" I keyed my comms, but all I got was a wall of white noise and the faint, haunting melody of the ethel wind harps being destroyed. The Coalition's scramblers were still active, or maybe the falling city had finally crushed the relay stations. Either way, we were on our own. "Kaelin," Xylia's voice was a frayed thread in my mind. "The memory. It's coming back, not mine. Yours." I felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the damp cavern air. The Vora-Nexus was reacting to the planetary trauma by digging deeper into the strata of our shared consciousness. The walls of the cave began to blur, replaced by the flickering, blue-lit corridors of the Obsidian Protocol. "No," I thought, trying to shove the images back into the dark. "Not now. We have to focus." But the Nexus didn't care about tactical focus. It was a living thing, and it was starving for the truth. Suddenly, I wasn't running through a cave on Ethelgard. I was back in the belly of the UES, Aegis, the Coalition carrier, 3 years ago. I was standing in a room filled with 254 glass cylinders. Inside each cylinder was a human being, a political dissident, a surplus colonist, or a soldier who had asked too many questions. They were being kept in a state of stasis, their neural patterns being harvested to feed the Coalition's early attempts at bioquantum computing. This was the real Obsidian Protocol, not just a military failure at Helios. Helios had been a cover-up, a way to test if a commander would sacrifice civilians to protect the hardware hidden in the outpost basement. I saw myself standing before the override console. I had the codes to vent the stasis chambers, to kill them all and purge the evidence as the brass had ordered. It was the logical choice. It was the choice that would have saved the Coalition's reputation and secured my promotion to major. I remember my hand hovering over the kill switch. I remember the silence of the room, the way the hum of the life support felt like a heartbeat. And I remember the face of a woman in the third cylinder, a woman who looked exactly like the teacher from New Geneva. I had turned the console off. I had walked out. I had allowed the insurgents to take the outpost, knowing they would find the bodies, knowing the scandal would break the coalition's back. But the coalition was faster. They had scrubbed the logs, turned the victims into unavoidable casualties of war, and turned me into the fall guy. "You chose the shame," Xylia whispered, her form appearing in the blue-lit memory beside the stasis pods. "You didn't just stay at Helios to save lives, Kalen. You stayed because you couldn't be the executioner anymore. You chose to be broken so that they couldn't use you as a blade." The memory shattered. I was back in the cave, gasping for air. The taste of ozone and ash thickened my throat. We were standing at the edge of the veins, a network of translucent tubes that ran deep into the planet's core. The blue liquid inside was pulsing with a violent, erratic energy. Elder Rin was at a control terminal that looked like a giant musical instrument. His fingers moved across the glowing strings, trying to harmonize the planet's output with the falling city's descent. "It's too much!" Rin shouted over the roar of the geothermal geysers. "The dissonance is too high. The planet is fighting the city, and the city is winning." Reed was standing guard at the tunnel entrance, his rifle spitting violet bolts into the darkness. "We've got more ghost suits. They're coming down the fissure. They don't want us to stop the drop. They want the whole planet wiped." I looked at Xylia. She was moving toward the central resonance pillar, her skin glowing with a terrifying white-hot intensity. She was going to interface with the core. "Xylia, no!" I yelled, the pull suddenly turning into a searing pain in my chest. "You can't take that much energy. It'll burn you out." "I have to, Kalen," she thought back, her mind a calm, indigo lake in the middle of a firestorm. "I am the daughter of Ethelgard. I am the symphony. I can hold the city up, but I need a ground. I need someone to take the dissonance. A ground. A lightning rod for the psychic pain of a dying world." Elder Rin looked at me, his milky eyes wide with realization. "The asymmetry, Sentinel. The perfect ethel frequency cannot handle the discord of the coalition's interference. It's too pure. It will shatter. But you are already full of discord. You are already broken. You can absorb the static that would kill her." I looked at my hands. They were shaking. I was a man who had spent 3 years believing he was a failure because he couldn't follow a heartless order. I had carried my guilt like a shroud, thinking it made me less than the soldiers I served with. But Rin was right. My flaws, my refusal to be a perfect, unfeeling tool, were exactly what made me capable of standing in this fire. I wasn't a weapon. I was a buffer. I stepped up to the pillar beside Xylia. The energy coming off it was enough to make the hair on my arms stand up and smell like burning. "What do I do?" I asked. Xylia reached out and took my hand. Our fingers interlaced, the violet vein in my arm glowing so bright it was translucent. "Just don't let go," she thought. "Give me your shame, Kalen. Give me the obsidian protocol. Give me the fire of Helios. I will turn it into a shield." I closed my eyes and opened the floodgates. I let it all out. The faces of the people I couldn't save. The cold sneer of Ambassador Miller. The weight of 1,000 nights spent wishing I were dead. I poured my brokenness into the bond, a dark, jagged current of human pain. The effect was instantaneous. The white-hot energy of the pillar hit me like a physical wave, but instead of shattering me, it flowed into the cracks of my soul. It filled the holes left by the coalition's betrayal. It resonated with the discord of my life and turned it into a heavy, grounding thrum. Xylia gasped, her skin turning a brilliant, stable indigo. She leaned into the pillar, her other hand pressing against the living crystal. "I see it," she screamed in my mind. "I see the city." Above us, the falling city of Solis Prime slowed. The blue plasma vents sputtered and died as the planet's resonance rose up to meet the foundations. It wasn't a crash. It was a docking. The city began to hover, held in place by a tether of light that stretched from the veins to the clouds. But the cost was immediate. I felt my heart skip beats, my nervous system redlining as I channeled the dissonance. Blood began to leak from my nose, and my vision started to gray out at the edges. "Reed," I choked out. "Keep them." Off us. I'm on it, Kai. Reed's voice was a distant growl. But we've got a dozen more coming. It's a Charlie Foxtrot down here. I didn't care about the ghost suits anymore. I didn't care about the coalition. I just looked at Xylia, who was glowing like a newborn star. We were doing it. The asymmetrical bond, the broken soldier and the perfect princess, was holding a world together. And in that moment, as the pain threatened to tear me apart, I finally understood the lesson Elder Rin had tried to teach us. My flaws weren't something to be fixed. They were the very thing that made me capable of love. Because you can't truly connect with another being until you admit that you aren't whole on your own. Stay with me, Xylia, I thought, my mind drifting toward the white void. Always, Kaelin, she replied, her voice the only thing keeping me from falling. Always. The resonance engine was not a machine of metal and gears. It was a cathedral of pulsing light, a chamber deep within the planet's crust where the very breath of Vanguard Prime was focused through a series of massive, crystalline baffles. It looked like the inside of a living eye, with optic nerve conduits of glowing blue liquid stretching toward a central iris of pure, white energy. We had reached the heart, but the heart was failing. The ground beneath us was bucking like a wild animal. Solis Prime, held in place by the tether Xylia and I had created, was still a massive, unstable weight. The coalition carrier above was likely firing its gravity wells, trying to force the city down, trying to break the resonance that was defying their orders. Vance, we're running out of time. Captain Reed was crouched behind a shard of fallen crystal, his pulse rifle glowing red from overuse. He was bleeding from a shrapnel wound on his forehead, but his eyes were steady. That carrier is prepping a localized orbital strike. They're going to punch a hole through the city to get to us. They're going to glass their own people? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I was slumped against the central iris, my hand still locked with Xylia's. The violet light in my arm was so intense it was beginning to char the sleeve of my uniform. Miller's done the math, Vance, Reed shouted over the roar of the engine. To them, losing Solis Prime is worth it if it means ending the Vora-Nexus. They can't control a world they can't understand. I looked at Xylia. She was deep in the trance, her consciousness woven into the planet's core. She was the bridge, but she was fraying. The sheer volume of energy was turning her skin into a map of glowing fractures. Xylia, look at me, I projected, trying to pull her back from the brink of total dissolution. She turned her head, her violet eyes now twin voids of white starlight. Kaelin, the dissonance is too much. The carrier, their frequency is like a blade. They are cutting the tether. I felt it then, a sharp, stinging vibration in the bond. The coalition carrier, the UES Aegis, was broadcasting a high-intensity jamming signal designed to mimic the Ethel's perfect symmetry. It was a technological mockery of their culture, a cold, mathematical harmony that was trying to cancel out Xylia's resonance. Elder Rin was frantically working the Shaper's strings, his hands bleeding from the effort. It's the null signal, he cried out. They've synthesized the ethel frequency. They're creating a perfect mirror match. It will cancel her out. If they're using symmetry to kill her, then we need to use the asymmetry to save her, I realized. The humanistic theme I had been grappling with, the acceptance of my own brokenness, was no longer a philosophical point. It was the only weapon we had left. The Coalition's machines could mirror the ethel's perfection, but they couldn't mirror a human's flaws. They couldn't mirror the messy, beautiful, asymmetrical chaos of a soul that had been through the fire and come out scarred. Elder Rin, I yelled, can you pipe my neural feed directly into the primary baffle? Rin looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. Sentinel, the human mind is not built for that kind of throughput. The discord will shred your cortex. You'll be a vegetable in 3 minutes. I've been a vegetable for 3 years, Elder, I roared, pulling myself up to the interface. Just do it. Use the static. Use the Helios memory. Use everything that the Coalition thinks is a flaw. Rin hesitated, then his face hardened into a mask of grim determination. He struck a series of deep, dissonant notes on his strings. Forgive me, Kaelin Vance, he whispered. The world didn't just explode, it inverted. I was no longer a man standing in a cave. I was a wave of pure, unadulterated human noise. I felt the resonance engine catch my frequency, and for a second it recoiled. It was like a master violinist being forced to play a distorted electric guitar. But then, the engine accepted it. The white energy of the iris turned a jagged, pulsing violet. My brokenness, the memories of the stasis pods, the shame of the solution, the grief for the ghosts of Helios, was amplified 1,000,000 times over. It was a frequency that no machine could predict and no mirror could match. The null signal from the coalition carrier hit my frequency and shattered. You can't cancel out chaos with a mirror. You can only be consumed by it. Above us, I felt the UES Aegis's gravity well short out. I felt the frustration of the technicians in the carrier as their perfect algorithms were shredded by a single human heart that refused to be symmetrical. But the throughput was killing me. I could feel my memories being burned away, one by one. I saw the face of my mother, then it was gone. I saw the skyline of Geneva, then it was gone. I was being hollowed out to provide the fuel for the resonance. "Kalen, stop!" Xylia's voice was a scream in my soul. "You are disappearing!" I didn't stop. I couldn't. This was the choice I had been moving toward since I first stepped onto Ethelgard. I had spent my life trying to protect my own skin, my own career, my own ego. But true protection, the kind that the Vora-Nexus demanded, meant being willing to lose yourself to save the whole. I am the sentinel, I thought, and the thought was a shield. I am the ground. Suddenly, a third presence entered the bond. It was Captain Reed. He had stepped up behind me, his hand slamming onto my shoulder. His skin didn't glow, and he didn't have a nexus vein, but he was a soldier. He was a man who had just betrayed his empire to do what was right. He was just as broken as I was. "I'm in, Vance," his thought came through, rough and unpolished, but solid as a rock. "You're not the only one with a few dents in his armor. Use me." Then came Elder Rin. Then the faint, distant echoes of the Shapers in the city above. The Vora-Nexus wasn't just a bond between two people anymore. It was becoming a network. A web of asymmetrical, flawed, beautiful lives, all leaning into each other to hold back the dark. The energy stabilized. The violet light of the engine grew steady, not a perfect sterile beam, but a rich, complex tapestry of color. Solis Prime stopped falling. It settled into a permanent, stable orbit, anchored not by technology, but by the shared frequency of two species finally learning how to breathe together. The orbital strike from the carrier never came. Miller and the brass must have realized that they couldn't hit us without destroying the city they so desperately wanted to control. Or maybe, just maybe, some of the soldiers on that ship had felt the resonance too. The energy in the chamber began to fade. The iris dimmed to a soft, pulsing violet. I fell back from the interface, my body feeling like it was made of lead. I couldn't move my legs and my vision was a blurry mess of indigo and gray. "Kalen?" Xylia was there. She had caught me before I hit the ground. Her skin was back to its deep, healthy indigo, her markings glowing with a soft, peaceful warmth. She looked whole. "I did it." I coughed, the metallic taste of blood still in my mouth. "We did it," she thought, pulling my head into her lap. She looked up at Reed, who was sitting on the floor, leaning against his rifle and laughing a tired, hysterical laugh. And the captain helped. Reed wiped the blood from his eyes and gave me a thumbs up. "Pretty slick, Vance. For a guy who was supposed to be a ghost, you've got a hell of a scream." Elder Rin stood over us, his mossy mantle beginning to turn green again as the planet's resonance healed the underground. "The fifth phase is complete," he said, his voice now as smooth as a cello. "But it is not the completion of the old text. You have created something new, a resonance of choice." I looked at Xylia. She was smiling, her eyes reflecting the light of the engine. I had lost my memories of Geneva, and I had lost my career in the Coalition, and I had lost the man I thought I was supposed to be. But I had found the man I actually was. I was a sentinel. I was a ground. I was a person who was allowed to be broken because that was where the light got in. The transformation was painful, and the road ahead was still choked with the ruins of a city in the shadow of a hostile empire. But as I lay there in the heart of Ethelgard, Feeling Xylia's indigo heart beating in perfect asymmetrical time with my own, I realized that I wasn't afraid anymore. We had shown them the cost of loyalty, and we had shown them the value of discord. The stars were still out there, cold and vast and full of empires that wanted to turn souls into tools. But here, in the dark crust of a violet world, we had found a frequency that they couldn't touch. We were the Nexus, and we were finally awake. The silence that followed the stabilization of the resonance engine was not a hollow thing. It was thick and heavy, like the air in a room after a shout has just died away. For a few seconds, the only sound in the heart of Ethelgard was the frantic, rhythmic tapping of blue liquid dripping from a ruptured conduit and the ragged, wet breathing coming from my own lungs. I was slumped against the central iris, my body feeling as though it had been hollowed out and filled with cold lead. My vision was a flickering kaleidoscope of violet and gray, and every time my heart beat, a sharp, electric tingle raced down the glowing vein in my arm. I could taste the metallic tang of blood in the back of my throat, a souvenir of the dissonance I had just channeled. Kaelin? Xylia's voice in my head was no longer a scream. It was a soft, steady thrum, as comforting as a warm blanket on a winter night. I felt her indigo hands on my shoulders, her touch grounding me back into reality. I opened my eyes and saw her face. She looked exhausted, her skin translucent, and her markings dimmed to a soft lavender, but her eyes were clear. We did it, she thought, and the relief that flooded through our bond was so pure, it made my eyes sting. The city, it is held. I tried to nod, but my neck felt like a rusted hinge. I looked toward the tunnel entrance. Captain Reed was sitting on the obsidian floor, his pulse rifle resting across his knees. He was staring at the shimmering violet light of the engine with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost and realized the ghost was his long-lost brother. "Vance," he croaked, his voice sounding like it had been dragged over a mile of gravel. "Tell me you saw that. Tell me I didn't just hallucinate a human being turning into a planetary fuse." "It happened, Reed," I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. "We're still here." Reed let out a short, hysterical laugh and leaned his head back against the crystal wall. "Well, damn, guess I really have bought the farm now. There's no way the brass is going to let me walk after this. I'm officially a Section 8 deserter with a front row seat to the end of the world." "You didn't desert, Reed," I said, trying to push myself up. Xylia's hand stayed on my chest, keeping me steady. "You chose a side. There's a difference." Before Reed could respond, the silence was shattered by the sound of heavy boots. Not the melodic click of Ethel sentinels, but the rhythmic, synchronized stomp of Coalition tactical gear. I reached for my pistol, but my hand was shaking so badly I couldn't even unholster it. "Easy, Kaelin," Xylia thought, her presence in my mind turning into a cool, protective shield. "It is the Emperor, and your ambassador." The group that entered the chamber was a study in contrasts. Emperor Valerian marched at the front, his ceremonial armor scorched, and his face a mask of imperial fury. Beside him, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the galaxy, was Ambassador Miller. Behind them stood a dozen royal sentinels and a few coalition officers who looked decidedly uncomfortable with their rifles leveled at an alien monarch. The Emperor stopped 10 paces from the resonance engine, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The broken glass, the bleeding soldier, the indigo princess sitting on the floor with a human's head in her lap. He looked at the violet light of the iris, which was still pulsing with the asymmetrical frequency we had created. "Daughter," the Emperor said, his voice vibrating with the weight of centuries. "What have you done to the heart of our world?" "I have saved it, Father," Xylia said, her voice echoing through the chamber without the need for mental projection. She stood up slowly, keeping a hand on my shoulder to help me find my balance. "I have allowed the discord of the stars to find a home in our resonance. The city is held, not by the purity of our blood, but by the strength of our connection." Miller stepped forward, his eyes darting toward the coalition carrier's feet on his tablet. "Vance, you're in deep," he said, his voice lacking its usual diplomatic polish. He sounded scared. The Aegis is reporting a total system failure on their jamming arrays. They say the planet's output just scrambled their logic. You've neutralized a billion-credit carrier with a heartbeat. Then tell them to pack it up, Miller, I growled, leaning heavily on Xylia. The mission is FUBAR. You tried to drop a city on a planet's heart. That's not a retrieval, that's a war crime. And I've got the logs to prove it. Miller blanched, his gaze shifting to Reed, who was still sitting on the floor with his rifle out. Reed? What the hell are you doing down here? You're supposed to be with the strike team. The strike team is KIA, or retreating, Reed said, not looking up. And I'm done taking orders from a bunch of suits who think a genocide is a good trade-off for a new battery. I'm with Vance. The Emperor turned to Miller, his skin glowing a dangerous, brilliant crimson. Your people have violated the sanctity of the gardens. You have attempted to murder my heir and destroy my capital. If the Vora-Nexus had not held, we would all be dust. Miller opened his mouth to offer a diplomatic excuse, but he seemed to realize that the time for lies had passed. He looked at me, then at the violet vein in my arm. The hatred was still there, but beneath it was a dawning realization that the world had changed in a way that his protocols couldn't handle. The Aegis is withdrawing to the outer rim, Miller said, his voice small. They've been ordered to stand down. For now. But Vance, you can't stay here. You're human. You belong to the coalition. I looked at Xylia. I felt the steady indigo thrum of her heart in my mind. I felt the way our frequencies had merged, the way my broken pieces had filled the gaps in her perfection. I remembered the stasis pods of the Obsidian Protocol and the faceless orders of the brass. I don't belong to anyone, Miller, I said. I'm a sentinel, and as long as this heart is beating, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The Emperor looked at me then, really looked at me, for a long time. The fury in his eyes began to shift, replaced by a profound, unsettling curiosity. He saw the scars on my face, the blood on my uniform, and the way the princess looked at me, not as a tool, but as a part of herself. A resonance of choice, the Emperor whispered, repeating Elder Rin's words. It is a discord we cannot ignore. He turned to his sentinels. Escort the ambassador and his officers back to the embassy. They are to be restricted to their quarters until a full tribunal can be convened. And send for the Shapers. We must begin the reconstruction of Solis Prime. As the guards led a protesting Miller away, the chamber finally began to settle. The frantic energy of the engine cooled into a low, stable hum. Reed stood up, stretching his sore limbs, and walked over to us. He looked at the princess and gave a small, respectful nod. So what's the plan, boss? Reed asked, looking at me. Are we still on the clock? I looked at Xylia, and she smiled. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. A smile that held the light of two different suns. The clock is broken, Reed, I said, leaning into Xylia's warmth. We're starting a new one. In the days that followed the Solis drop, as the historians would later call it, the atmosphere on Ethelgard Prime remained thick with a strange transformative tension. The immediate threat of the coalition had retreated to the stars, but the internal reconstruction was far more complex. I spent most of those days in the healing gardens, my body slowly repairing the damage from the neural overload. The doctors were fascinated. They had never seen a human nervous system recover from such trauma, but they didn't realize that I wasn't doing it alone. Every time my energy flagged, I felt a surge of indigo strength from Xylia. Every time the nightmares of Helios tried to claw their way back, her resonance acted as a filter, turning the jagged edges of my memory into something smoother, something I could live with. Secondary characters in the palace were beginning to shift as well. I saw Ethel nobles who had once looked at me with disgust now watching me with a quiet, contemplative awe. They saw the way the princess walked with a new confidence, a new strength that was undeniably bolstered by the broken human at her side. Even the royal sentinels, those silent warriors of obsidian, started to acknowledge me with a brief, rhythmic click of their spears as I passed. Reed, surprisingly, had found a home among the Shapers. He wasn't a scientist, but his practical, grimy knowledge of human technology was invaluable as they tried to figure out how to shield the resonance engine from future coalition interference. I saw him one afternoon in a glass tree grove, teaching a group of indigo children how to tie a military-grade knot. He looked younger, the hardness in his eyes replaced by a sense of purpose I hadn't seen since the Belt Wars. "You're thinking about the future again, Kalen," Xylia said, joining me on the terrace one evening. The twin moons were high in the sky, casting their blue-silver light over the recovering city. "I am," I thought back, taking her hand. "I'm thinking that the Earth Coalition isn't going to stay away forever. They're scared of us, Xylia. They're scared of the fact that we can't be predicted." "Let them be scared," she projected, her mind a fortress of peace. "We have shown that the light doesn't just come from the suns, it comes from the gaps between us. As long as we are asymmetrical, we are free." I looked out over the horizon of Solis Prime, seeing the lights of the city flickering back to life. I realized then that I wasn't the same man who had landed on this planet a few weeks ago. I wasn't just a soldier who had failed his mission. I was a man who had accepted his scars as the very things that made him worth loving. The lesson was taking root. The transformation was nearly complete. And as the indigo night settled over Ethelgard, I knew that the resonance of our choice was just the beginning of a song that would eventually reach the stars. 1 week after the stabilization of Solis Prime, the atmosphere of Ethelgard had shifted from the frantic energy of survival to the slow, deliberate pulse of a new beginning. The city was no longer just an Ethel stronghold. It was a construction site of a new civilization. Everywhere I looked, I saw the indigo skin of the Ethel moving alongside the matte gray uniforms of human defectors and embassy staff who had chosen to stay. The two species were working together, not because a treaty told them to, but because they had seen the city fall and had seen it held by the strength of a shared heart. I stood on the Sentinel's terrace, a high, wind-swept balcony that overlooked the great fissure. The violet clouds were churning below, but above us the sky was a clear, brilliant sapphire. I wasn't wearing my coalition uniform anymore. Instead, I wore a suit of charcoal gray Ethel weave, accented with the violet sigils of a royal sentinel. It felt lighter than the military gear, more flexible, as if it were designed for a man who intended to move forward rather than just hold a line. Lieutenant Vance. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I could feel the rhythmic thrum of Emperor Valerian's resonance long before he spoke. He walked to the edge of the terrace and stood beside me, his gaze fixed on the reconstruction of the central spire. "The Shapers tell me that the resonance has permanently altered the city's foundations," the Emperor said, his voice holding a trace of that same grinding stone frequency I had heard in Elder Rin. "They say that Solis Prime is now physically tied to your human frequency. If you leave, the city will tilt." I looked at the glowing violet vein in my arm. It was a part of me now, as natural as my own heartbeat. "I'm not going anywhere, Your Majesty." "Valerius is gone," the Emperor continued, ignoring my comment for a moment. "He has been exiled to the Silent Moon. His followers are being reintegrated into the Shaper caste. The purity they sought was a stagnant pond, Vance. I see that now. My daughter, she has chosen a river instead. A river that is full of silt and stones, but one that actually moves." He turned to me, his violet eyes searching mine. "You have changed us, human. You have shown my people that to be whole, we must first admit we are incomplete. It is a terrifying lesson for a race that has lived for thousands of years in the illusion of perfection." "It was terrifying for me too," I admitted, the wind tugging at my hair. "I spent a long time thinking my scars were the things that made me useless. It turns out they were just the handles people could use to help me up." The Emperor placed a hand on my shoulder, a heavy indigo hand that didn't feel like an alien touch anymore. It felt like a father's. "Then continue to be the handle, Sentinel. The Earth Coalition has sent a new envoy. Not Miller. Someone who is willing to talk about a permanent bridge." He left me then, his resonance fading back into the palace, leaving me alone with the wind and the memories. I walked to the very edge of the terrace, looking out over the world I had helped save. I remembered the day I arrived on Ethelgard. I was a man with a hollowed-out soul, a ghost in a dark blue uniform who thought his life was a series of failures and protocols. I thought that being a soldier meant being a perfect, unfeeling instrument. I thought that the Obsidian Protocol was the only truth in a cold universe, that people were just cargo, and loyalty was just a box you checked on a report. But standing here, In the indigo light of a new world, I realize how wrong I was. For 35 years, I tried to be a man of steel and logic, only to find that steel breaks and logic fails when the fire gets too hot. I spent so much energy trying to hide the fact that I was broken, that I carried the guilt of Helios and the shame of the coalition like a cancer. I thought that if people saw the cracks, they wouldn't want the man, but it was in those very cracks that Xylia found a place to rest. It was my discord that neutralized the coalition's symmetry. It was my ability to feel the pain of 100 lives that allowed me to become a ground for a dying world. I didn't save Ethelgard by being a hero. I saved it by being a human, a messy, asymmetrical, grieving, and stubbornly hopeful human. I see now that humanity's greatest gift isn't our technology or our ambition. It's our ability to be unfinished. We are a species of scars, and those scars are the only things that allow us to truly connect. When you are perfect, you are a closed circle. When you are broken, you are an open hand. I look at my reflection in the glass railing of the terrace. I see the lines on my face, the silver scar on my chest, and the glowing violet light in my arm. I don't see a disgraced lieutenant anymore. I see a man who has finally found a resonance worth fighting for. I see a bridge, and I realize that the most important mission I ever undertook wasn't the one given to me by the brass. It was the mission to forgive myself for being real. A soft, indigo presence brushed against the back of my mind, and I felt a wave of warmth and jasmine-scented air. Xylia was standing at the doorway, her eyes reflecting the twin moons. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. The bond said it all. "Ready," she thought. "Ready," I replied. We walked off the terrace together, two asymmetrical souls heading into a future that was completely and beautifully unwritten. I spent a lifetime trying to polish my soul until it shone like a new recruit's boots, only to realize that the light only gets through the dents. I've lived through the fire of war and the cold of the void, and I've learned that the parts of us we think are the most broken are often the only parts that can truly save us. I wonder, what are the parts of yourself you've been trying to hide or fix? Those quiet shames, those old scars, those moments where you felt like you weren't enough? What if those very cracks are the only things that can bridge the distance between you and someone else? I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, tattered rag doll, the one the girl from Helios had given me 5 years ago. I placed it on the stone altar in the center of the garden, a small, asymmetrical piece of human history in an alien world, and watched as the indigo light of the moons turned its faded cloth into silver.